Hi guys, and welcome back to my little corner of the internet and YouTubes. And today's gonna be a little different because I did a review, but this time I took notes. So I have all the key points that I want to talk about, because normally when I do a review, I forget some of the things I want to talk about. I ramble on incoherently and I wind up 95% of the time just not posting the review. So gonna be referring to my notes a lot today. If you see me looking down a lot, I'm really sorry, but I really don't want to forget anything I'm intending to speak about this book. I want to talk about The Wolf by Leo Carew, and this is the first book in what I believe is a 3-book series called Under the Northern Sky. And in this world, there are different species, and these are not your typical fantasy creatures like fairies and ogres and giants, but in this world, it seems to be an alternate history of our own world. Post-Ice Age evolution, humanity has branched off into 3 different species. We have our own species, or the species that seems to be based off of our ancestors, known to us as the Southerners, known to the readers as the Southerners. There are the Anakim, which are based loosely on Neanderthals, but Neanderthals were smaller than us. These creatures, these humans, they're larger than us and much stronger, and they've evolved differently than Neanderthals, and they also live longer. Instead of us, who live at this point in time like 50 or 60 years, they're living about 2 centuries on average. And then there's a third species that we don't see in this book. They're referred to a couple times, but we don't see them or deal with them, and I believe these are called the Unihiru or the Unuhiru, and they live in the mountains. They're vegan. They're not perceived very positively, but we don't deal with them in this book at all. In the beginning, my cat is causing chaos. In the beginning of the story, we are just spectators in the beginning of a battle in the continent of Erebos, which is an alternate version of the Dark Ages Europe. And we're at the beginning of a battle between the invading Southerners, or humans, who, like humans, they want to expand and they want to take over the territory of the Anakim in the north. And we're watching this battle from the side of the Anakim, who wind up retreating from the battle after the Black Lord, who is essentially their king, he's killed in battle, after which his son is immediately placed in the position of power after watching his father be killed. This is unheard of. The Anakim do not lose, and they do not retreat, and immediately upon returning to the kingdom, lords and lictors, or generals, they dismiss our new ruler. His name is Roper. And they dismiss him, they cast him aside. They're kind of like, oh, you can be our Black Lord, you can be a lord, but don't try to actually rule, just kind of take a step back. So he's dismissed, but he's more intelligent and more respectable than they give him credit for. And when he sees what's going on, he sees he's being dismissed, he starts immediately forming alliances with members of the governing class, and so starts this internal power struggle among the Anakim. So between the Black Lord and the military commanders, there is a power struggle, and that, along with the invading Southerners, and also a plague that attacks the Anakim countryside, and how that is handled, it puts this whole civilization on the brink of a civil war. So you have an impending civil war, as well as invasions and an impending war with the Southerners. So that's our main storyline right here. Meanwhile, we also follow a Southern general named Balamus, I think it's Balamus, who studies the Anakim, and he doesn't only want to learn about them and study them from like an anthropological perspective, but he also obviously wants to defeat them because he is a general. So he believes learning about their culture and their society will increase his chances at winning the battle. We don't spend a lot of time with Belamus, but we do see the differences in the Southern and the Anakim cultures as he tries to get backing for a war, and financial backing and military backing from his own Southern ruling class, for a war that people just don't think humanity has a chance of winning. While we are following Belamus, we also get to see that the Southerners are in fact fearful of the Anakim. They even refer to them as fallen angels. They are much larger and much stronger than humans. And even though humans are much weaker, Belamus believes that they can invade and win using tactical forces and even some psychological warfare. There's not a lot of psychological warfare. It's not even really described as psychological warfare. It's very minimal, but it is brutal and it is intense, and it does work. It does hit the nail on the head as far as psychological warfare goes, and it earns the Southern warriors or cavalry the moniker of hermit crabs. I don't want to get into that. It's a little spoilery, but it is pretty nasty. And he believes we can do this by learning about their culture and the species as much as he can. And that's how we learn a lot too as readers. So there's no just straight up info dumping. There's just a lot of gathering information. It seems very natural. It's very smooth because Bellomus is learning about these creatures with us, and he's explaining these creatures very passively, very naturally to other characters. And that's how we learn a lot too. Meanwhile, the Anakim, they are not the antagonists in the story. They just want to defend their land from the invading Southerners. They're not a peaceful society by any means. They're definitely a warrior class, a warrior species. They are battle ready. They're just not the antagonists in the story. There's actually been a peace between the Southerners and the Anakim for a very long time until the Southerners invaded. But they are just defending what is theirs, although they do have a deep-seated hatred for the Southerners, not just obviously because of the invasion and the warfare, but also because of how the Southerners treat them. They kill their men like nothing, and they will kidnap their women, and let me just put it this way, they force the Anakim females to breed with them, and they're used like cattle, as Leo Carew describes it, like cattle. This creates a hybrid species, and they don't live very long. They're described as dim-witted with a few exceptions, but they cannot reproduce amongst themselves either, but they're very large and very strong like the Anakim. But because of all these things, they're just bred to be slaves. So they kidnap their women, they breed with them, they create these hybrid species, and then they just use them as slaves. They use them like mules. And so the Anakim they hate the Southerners, and the Southerners, it's not a hatred, it's a fear, but the Southerners have our instincts, I guess, and they just want to invade and take over them. So first and foremost, this is a war/political fantasy, and without feeling like a textbook and without a lot of info dumping, it also feels like it's more of an exploration into an alternate history of what would have happened if post-Ice Age other humans had evolved alongside with us, and how they would have developed culturally. And these evolutions and cultural revolutions are based on biology and their longevity as far as language goes, as far as culture goes, and that's just interesting to see. And it doesn't read like a textbook, like it reads like a fantasy story, but with the backdrop of the exploration into what could have been. But in this story, we're just seeing the turmoil that the Anakim are going through with the Black Lord, the governors, the lictors, the generals, and also a branch that's basically free to kill off any member of the governing class or any member of the ruling class that's causing too much harm to the country. So that's a whole other part of the story that we don't really see too much of in this book. I do wish we could have spent more time learning about that faction, the faction that's kind of free to like, oh, the ruler's screwing this up too much, we gotta kill the Black Lord. We don't really deal with them too much. There are hints of death threats and hints of assassinations, but that's part of spoilers that I cannot get into. I do wish we could have spent more time learning about them. I also wish we could have spent more time at a place called the Academy. And this is where history is recorded through, I'm gonna say they're Anakim, almost monks or scholars. Anakim do not have a written language. So they keep everything with oral history. Everything is oral history, and that's kept by the Academy. They dedicate their lives to memorizing the history of their species. But based on the title of the third book, The Cuckoo, I think that we'll be spending more time with that faction of the government, the borderline. I don't want to call them assassins. They're not assassins. But the group of government or the governing class that can get rid of anyone that's causing too much harm. And I think we'll be spending more time at the Academy also. And that's just based on the title. I could be totally wrong. But I gave this book a 3.5 stars. And that is only because I did want more from those two parts of the story. There were some things I wanted more from the characters. And then the women characters, for me, I know that this is going to be biased, but the women characters for me, they did feel very flat. I know they weren't main components of the story, but they did feel to me like females written by a man. I know that's a personal thing, and readers aren't looking for that sort of opinion, but that kind of booped my rating down just a little bit. But if we're just looking at the world building and like the concept to execution, this is a 5-star. Like, 5-star read. It's just my own personal things. Objectively, 5 stars, but my own personal reading experience was a 3.5, and I think it's just going to get better going forward. This is not going to be your typical fantasy. There's no fae warriors. There's no chosen one. There's no grand quest. It's not that sort of fantasy. It is very emotional. It is very brutal. It's very graphic. The battle scenes are intense. Bearing that in mind, it is an easy read. You don't have to be a historian. You don't have to be very well versed in fantasy to enjoy it. I personally don't read a lot of war or political fantasy. Not even A Song of Ice and Fire was something I really enjoyed as much as everybody else, because poly fantasy is just not my poly fantasy, because political fantasy is just not my cup of tea. But I really did enjoy reading this. I really did enjoy the war and the politics and the kind of meddling behind the scenes during war, which isn't something I typically enjoy, because I do typically have to reference back and forth, like, oh, I missed this, so I don't understand this, so what happened in this meeting. And I didn't have to do that in this book. It felt very fluid. It felt very natural. The progression of the story wasn't something I had to go back and reference anything to. And hopefully I'll be picking up the second book soon. The second book is called The Spider. The third book is The Cuckoo. And I think the second book is going to be, for my opinion rating, like my personal rating, I think it'll be a 4 or 5, because we're not going to have to deal with as much world building, because we know the world now. We know the characters now. So I think those things that I found lacking in the first, I think are going to be covered in the second and third books. So I'm looking forward to reading those. And that is it. I do recommend picking this up, even if it's one of your first fantasy reads. It is very, very straightforward. It's I don't want to say it's an easy read, because it's not an immature book. I also found out that this was Leo Carew's first novel, which, wow. But I do recommend picking this up. I'm looking forward to picking up The Spider. I'm hopefully going to pick that up next month, depending on how my reading goes. But that is everything. My cats are asleep. Otherwise, I would say, bring one of them up here to say hi. But thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time for a next review. So, bye.